If I had known where the last 10 years of my life would lead, I would have done a lot of things differently. It's hard to admit that at 73 you made a mistake that changed everything. My name is Barnaby Thorne, and today I'm going to tell you the story of how I lost my only son and fought a woman determined to take everything else from me. I was born in University City in the year 1952, when many things seemed impossible for people like us. My father was a mailman. My mother worked in a laundry. They were saving every dime so that one day I could go to college. I was bullied a lot in high school, but that's where I learned to stand up for what was right. After graduation, I went to law school, working nights to pay my tuition. No one believed I could do it, except my Beatrice. Beatrice Q was the prettiest girl in the psychology department, and I still can't understand why she chose me. We got married in our final year, and 3 years after graduation, Orson was born to us. Despite the hardships, we made it through. I worked at a small law firm specializing in civil law, then started my own practice with a classmate, Carmichael Atwood. In 1985, we were already representing half of the businessmen in University City. I'm proud that Carmichael and I built it from the ground up. My son Orson was an observant and intelligent boy. I saw him as an extension of myself, the same tenacity, the same passion for justice. When he turned 15, he declared that he wanted to become a lawyer like me. Beatrice smiled and said, "Apple from the apple." I believed that one day my son and I would be working side by side defending a just cause. High school, college, law school, Orson traveled the same path I did, only much easier. Beatrice and I made sure he had everything he needed to focus on his studies. At 25, he graduated magna cum laude and joined our firm, Thorne and Atwood. Carmichael was getting ready to retire, so we decided to rename the firm Thorne and Son. Orson turned out to be a born lawyer. Clients entrusted him with the most difficult cases, and he rarely lost. I often watched him in court, tall, broad-shouldered, with impeccable logic and persuasive speech. Prosecutors respected him. Judges listened. I was proud. At 30, he was still unmarried, and Beatrice began to worry. I didn't rush things, believing that all in good time. Then Orson met her, Irma Sloan, a 27-year-old beauty with smooth, dark skin and eyes that could freeze and melt at the same time. She worked as a financial analyst for one of the banks we worked with. They had met at a charity event, and Orson had immediately lost his head. From the first time we met, I sensed something wrong about Irma. She smiled, said the right words, but her eyes remained cold, assessing. I noticed the way she looked around our living room, as if assessing the value of each item. When Orson talked about his plans to open a branch of the firm in a neighboring town, she barely held back a yawn. But as soon as the profits were mentioned, her gaze instantly brightened. "Barnaby, aren't you afraid your firm is becoming obsolete? Things are changing so fast these days," she asked once at dinner, when we'd barely met. Orson looked confused then. "Irma, Dad has been practicing law for 40 years. "That's exactly why I'm asking," she parried, smiling at me. "Sometimes experience gets in the way of seeing new possibilities." Beatrice changed the subject gently, but I noticed Irma's lips tighten unhappily. That night was the first time I wondered what she saw in Orson himself, or the prospect of inheriting a thriving business. 6 months later, they announced their engagement. I tried to talk to my son, to express my doubts, but he took it as an insult. "You just don't like her voicing her opinion," he said at the time. "It's not about her opinion, son. It's about what drives her. She's a financier, Dad. Of course she's interested in how to grow the business. Our business has always been about helping people, not maximizing profits," I reminded her. "Times change," Orson replied with a phrase I was sure Irma had put in his head. The wedding was played in the summer, and I tried to be happy for Orson's sake. Beatrice whispered to me during the ceremony, "Give her a chance, Barney. People change." I nodded, though I doubted it inside. People don't change that easily, especially when it's not favorable to them. After the wedding, Orson started working more, often staying late. "You have to provide for your family," he said, though the family was just him and Irma, who had decided to put the kids on hold. I'd noticed his priorities changing. Now he was taking on cases for big corporations instead of ordinary people in need of defense. Our firm had always been known for standing up for the community, but things were slowly changing. One day I walked into his office and saw on his desk the incorporation papers for a new company, Thorne Legal Services, with no mention of my name. When I asked him about it, he awkwardly explained that it was just a project he and Irma had discussed. "Were you going to tell me?" I asked, feeling my chest tighten. Of course I was, Dad. Just an idea for the future when you decide to step away, Orson replied without looking me in the eye. That same evening, I got a text from my banker. It turned out Orson was trying to get information about my personal accounts and investments. When I called my son, he explained it was because he was concerned about my future and wanted to help with inheritance planning. The explanation sounded reasonable, but something was bugging me. Beatrice advised me to stay out of their relationship, to give them space. You didn't always get along with your father either, she reminded me. I tried to follow her advice, but with each passing month, Orson became more and more distant. He rarely came over for Sunday dinners, never called for no reason. Even on Christmas Day, he and Irma only came for a couple of hours, apologizing that they had to catch an appointment with her colleagues. A year after the wedding, Beatrice was diagnosed with cancer. When I called Orson to break the news, Irma answered the phone. He's in an important meeting, I'll tell him, she said, and hung up. Orson didn't call back until the evening, his voice sounding concerned, but he didn't come to visit his mother, citing an important court case. I knew he didn't have court that day. Beatrice was fading fast. The disease appeared to be in its last stages. At the hospital, she took my hand and said, "Don't lose Orson, Barney. No matter what happens, he's our son." I promised, even though I felt even then that I was losing him. She died 3 months later. At the funeral, Orson stood beside me, pale and lost. Irma held his hand, occasionally glancing at her watch. When the ceremony was over, she whispered something to him, and they left without even waiting for me to finish talking to the priest. After Beatrice died, my relationship with Orson became even more strained. I tried to call him, invited him to lunch, offered to meet him at the office, but he always found excuses. Now Irma represented him, at business dinners, in conversations with clients, even when talking to me. She became his voice, and gradually I stopped recognizing my son and what he said. 6 months after Beatrice's funeral, Orson came into my office with a folder of papers. He looked determined, even aggressive, an expression I'd never seen on his face before. "Dad, we need to talk about the future of the firm," he began without preamble. "Sure, son. I'm always open to discussion. I think it's time to rethink the management structure. I'm 32. I have more energy, new ideas. I bring in more clients than you do." I was stunned by the candor. "Orson, this is a firm I've spent a lifetime building. You've only worked here for 7 years. That's exactly why we need change. The world doesn't stand still, Dad." He laid the documents in front of me, a plan to reorganize the firm where my role was reduced to honorary consultant, and he would make all the decisions. Essentially, I was being removed from my life's work. "Did Irma come up with this?" I asked bluntly. Orson flared up. "Leave her out of it. It's my decision. Son, I don't mind change, but not like this and not now." "When then? When you're 80? There was unconcealed aggression in his voice. "I can't wait forever." "It's like you're not speaking in your own words," I remarked, and that finally pissed him off. "You know what? Forget it. I thought we could agree like adults, but you always thought I was a child. Always thought you knew better." He grabbed the papers and walked out, slamming the door. I tried to call him in the evening, but his phone was off. The next day, he didn't show up for work, and I learned from the secretary that he had taken a leave of absence for personal reasons. A week later, I received a letter from the lawyer representing Orson. He demanded to buy out his stake in the firm at 3 times the actual value. The letter mentioned the threat of litigation if he refused. That's when I realized I'd lost my son, not because of a fight, because of a woman who was methodically destroying everything he and I had built together. Irma had gotten her way. She had come between father and son, convinced him that he was owed more than he had. I called my old friend Carmichael Atwood. He listened to me and said, "Barney, I'm sorry, but you have to be prepared for the worst. If she's turned him against you now, think what will happen when the inheritance comes up." And that's when I began to prepare for a battle I never dreamed of. The battle for my family's legacy against the woman who stole my son. For 2 months, I had no contact with my son after his ultimatum. 2 strange, empty weeks when I'd come into the office and stare at the closed door of his office. Orson worked with clients from home, avoiding meetings with me. The secretary passed documents between us as if we were warring nations. I couldn't believe it had come to this. One evening, as I sat in the office late one night, the phone rang. Orson's number popped up on the screen and my heart beat faster. Maybe he'd come to his senses, decided to reconcile. "Hello, son," I said hopefully. "Barnaby, it's Irma." My sister-in-law's voice sounded colder than usual. Orson wanted me to tell you that he's willing to lower the price on his share if you close the deal quickly. I squeezed the receiver tighter. Irma, why can't he call me himself? He's very busy with a new project, she replied with feigned regret. You know what a workaholic he is. Yes, I know my son, I replied, putting emphasis on the word his. Why don't we meet and discuss things in person, all three of us? A pause. I'm afraid this isn't the best time, but I'll pass on your suggestion. She hung up without waiting for a response. I sat in the semi-darkness of the office, listening to the dial tone. When did my son turn into a man who communicates with his father through his wife? What had she said to him to make him so distant? The next day I got an email from their lawyer, another buyout offer, now with a slight discount and a short time frame to make a decision. As if I wasn't bargaining for my life's work, but for a used car. I declined. A week later, I received notice that Orson had filed a lawsuit to force a division of the firm's assets. My own son was suing me. That evening, I drank more than usual, pulled out the old photos. Orson at 5 years old on my shoulders. At 12, proudly holding the chess trophy he won. At 18, receiving his diploma, looking at the camera with such confidence that my heart clenched. At 25, wearing the gown of a law school graduate, hugging Beatrice and me. We looked so happy. In those days, I began to realize that Irma wasn't just distancing him from me. She was methodically reshaping his worldview. Orson had always been proud of our firm, its reputation for protecting the common man. Now, according to the documents I'd seen, he planned to turn it into a corporate machine catering to the rich and powerful. My suspicions were confirmed when I got a call from Ruby Hawkins, a longtime client. Her family had been coming to us with legal matters for decades. Mr. Thorne, I just wanted to say how sorry I am, she began. What do you mean, Ruby? About your retirement. Orson told me you've decided to step away completely, and he'll be handling all of our matters from now on. I clenched my teeth. Ruby, that's not true. I'm not going anywhere. But he was so persuasive. His wife even sent us a fruit basket with a note about your retirement. That was the last straw. I called Orson, but Irma picked up the phone again. This time I didn't pretend to be polite. Tell my son that if he wants to talk to me like a man, have him come over. Alone, I said, and hung up. He arrived 2 days later. I waited for him in the living room, the same one where he took his first steps. Orson walked in without knocking, as if he were a stranger. He looked tired, shadows under his eyes. You've been spreading lies about me, I began without preamble. What lies? His voice sounded detached. You're telling clients that I'm retiring. That's not true, and you know it. Orson shrugged. It's just a matter of time. You're 71, Dad. Most people your age have long since retired. I'm not most, I replied. And it's not a matter of age. You're trying to squeeze me out of the firm I built. Which we built, he corrected. I've worked there for 8 years, and for the last 3 years I've brought in more clients than you. Because I passed some of mine on to you. I couldn't take it anymore and raised my voice. So you could develop as a lawyer, not so you could use it against me. He looked away. I don't want to fight, Dad. Just accept reality. The world is changing, and the firm needs to change too. Those aren't your words, I shook my head. It's Irma's. She wants control of the firm because she only sees it as money, not a legacy. Leave Irma out of this. He jumped up, his face contorted with anger. It's always the same thing. You never accepted her from the beginning. Because I've seen who she really is, I replied calmly. She's manipulating you, Orson. Alienating you from your family, from everything that was important. Look what we've come to. You're suing me. Because you left me no choice. He was yelling now, forgetting the restraint I'd taught him. You don't want to admit that your time has passed. My time is determined by me, not you or Irma. I stood up too, looking him in the eye. Son, come to your senses. We can work this out differently. Different how? He crossed his arms over his chest. You're going to give me control of the firm? No, but we can find a compromise. Work together like we used to. You used to make all the decisions. Because I had the experience you were just building up. Orson shook his head. Right now my experience says we're better off splitting up. He headed for the door, but I stopped him. Son, think about what your mother would say. He froze for a moment, then turned around, his face twisted in pain. Don't you dare use her memory. She would want me to be happy. Are you happy? I asked quietly. Really happy, destroying what we built together? He didn't answer, just slammed the door. I stood in the middle of the room for a long time, listening to his car start and drive away. Something told me that this was our last face-to-face meeting. The next day I got a call from Geraldine, our firm's secretary for 20 years. Her voice trembled. "Mr. Thorne, Mrs. Thorne came in this morning. I mean Irma. She was copying some documents from your private safe." I went cold. "From my safe? How did she gain access?" "Mr. Orson gave her the key. I tried to tell her it was wrong, but she insisted she was acting on his behalf." "You know what she's like." "Thank you for letting me know, Geraldine." I tried to speak calmly so as not to frighten the older woman. "Do you have any idea what kind of documents she took?" "Something to do with your late wife's will, I think, and the financial documents for the house." I thanked her and hung up. They were looking for vulnerabilities. The house was deeded to me and Beatrice. Upon her death, it passed completely to me. Beatrice's will specified that all of her assets would pass to me, and upon my death, to Orson. But now I realized that Irma didn't want to wait for me to die. She wanted everything now. That same evening, I called Carmichael Atwood. Even though he had retired a few years ago, we had maintained a friendly relationship. "Carm, I need your help," I said without preamble. "What's wrong, Barney?" There was alarm in his voice. I told him everything. The conflict with Orson, the lawsuit, Irma going through my files. "They're looking for a way to take everything away from me," I concluded. "And I'm afraid the house is just the beginning." Carmichael was quiet for a moment, then said, "Come see me tomorrow, not to the office home. We need to have a serious talk." The next day I drove to Carmichael's house. He had lived in a small house on the edge of town since he had been widowed 5 years before. We sat on the veranda looking out over his well-tended garden. Two old men living out their days. That's what a casual observer would probably think. But we were discussing a battle plan. "They want to take your firm away from you through the courts." Carmichael tapped his fingers on the table thoughtfully. "What about personal assets? You have investments, right?" "Yes, and quite a few," I nodded. "Beatrice and I have always been saving for the future. Most of the money is in a trust fund that I planned to give to Orson after I died. And now? Right now, I'm not sure I want Irma to get it all, because that would effectively mean the money would go to her." Carmichael nodded understandingly. "We need to review your will and asset structure. If Orson is truly under her influence, you need to protect your legacy." "But he's my son." I felt the words stick in my throat. "The only one. Everything I have was always meant for him." "Things can still get better." Carmichael put a hand on my shoulder. "But we have to be prepared for the worst. I know an excellent specialist in probate law. He can help us strategize." That afternoon, we began to develop a plan to protect my legacy from a woman who I was sure only wanted money. I never thought I would be forced to defend my estate against my own son. But times had changed, and I had to adapt. A week later, the first court hearing for Orson's lawsuit was held. I saw my son for the first time in a month. He was sitting at the plaintiff's table next to Irma, who kept whispering something in his ear. I was represented by a young attorney recommended by Carmichael. Orson is a well-known corporate lawyer specializing in hostile takeovers, as he himself put it in his opening remarks. I couldn't take my eyes off my son. He avoided my gaze, looking only at the judge or the papers. Irma, on the other hand, often turned around, studying me with cold curiosity. The meeting was short, procedural matters, setting a date for the main hearing. As we left the room, I tried to approach Orson, but Irma stepped between us. "Mr. Thorne, all communications through the attorneys, please," she said with a polite smile that didn't affect her eyes. "I want to talk to my son, not you," I replied, looking at Orson over her shoulder. He finally looked up. For a moment, I thought something flashed in them: doubt, regret. But then his face became impenetrable again. "Dad, don't make this difficult," he said quietly. "Let's just settle this in a civilized way." "Civilized? You're suing me, son." "Because you left me no choice." He shook his head. "We tried to settle amicably." "Amicably?" I couldn't believe my ears. "You came to me with an ultimatum, and when I didn't agree, you started a lawsuit. Is that what you call amicable?" Irma took him under her arm. "Orson, we have to go. We have a meeting." He let her lead him away without even saying goodbye. I stood in the hallway of the courthouse, feeling the ground go from under my feet. My son, my own flesh and blood, a stranger. In the car on the way home, I called Carmichael. "You were right," I said. "We have to be prepared for the worst." That same evening, I met with him and a specialist in probate law, Samuel Frost. Samuel was an older, experienced lawyer with a reputation for finding out-of-the-box solutions to complex situations. Mr. Thorne, he said after hearing my story, I can see that the situation is delicate. You want to protect your estate, but you don't want to completely disinherit your son, correct? Yes, I nodded. No matter what, he's my son. I just don't want everything I've spent a lifetime building to go to a woman who only sees it as money. I understand. In cases like this, we usually recommend setting up a special trust with certain conditions. For example, the heir only gets access to the assets if specific requirements are met. What requirements? I asked, already beginning to see where he was going with this. They can be any conditions you deem important. For example, the funds can be used for the education of grandchildren, if any, or to continue certain charitable initiatives that are important to your family. We discussed the various options at length, and gradually a plan began to take shape. I decided to change my will, creating a trust that would ensure that my wishes would be honored even after my death. It was an extreme measure, but I felt I had no choice. There's one more thing, I said when we were done discussing the legal details. I'm worried that Orson may be incapable of making some decisions. Carmichael nodded understandingly. Do you think Irma controls him to that extent? I don't know, I admitted. But he's changed so much over the years. Sometimes I think he's acting out of his own free will. That's a serious statement, Samuel remarked. If you believe your son is under undue influence that is distorting his judgment, we can include provisions in the will to protect his interests from manipulation. Yes, that's exactly what I need. I was relieved that he understood me. I want to protect Orson from himself, and from Irma. When I got home late that night, there was a letter in the mailbox. An official notice that Orson and Irma were requesting a psychiatric evaluation to assess my capacity. They claimed that I was showing signs of age-related dementia and paranoia, and therefore could not adequately run the firm. As I sat on the porch, looking at the letter in the light of a street lamp, I realized that the feud had moved to a new level. They didn't just want my money. They wanted to strip me of my dignity, declare me crazy. I didn't sleep a wink that night, thinking that now I had to defend not only my property, but also my honor. And I vowed that I would do everything in my power to keep Irma from winning. The phone call came at 3 a.m. I'd never slept soundly since Beatrice's death, but it still took me a few seconds to realize what was happening. The number was unfamiliar. Barnaby Thorne here, I said in a voice hoarse from sleep. Mr. Thorne, the female voice sounded official. This is Officer Carrie Page of the University City Police Department. I'm very sorry to break the bad news to you. My heart stopped for a moment. There are some calls that change lives forever. This was one of them. Your son, Orson Thorne. There's been an accident. I sat up on the bed, suddenly fully awake. What happened? Is he okay? The silence on the other end of the line told me everything before the words came out. I'm so sorry, Mr. Thorne. Your son was killed in a car accident an hour ago. I don't remember what I replied. The room spun around me, and the officer's voice continued to sound somewhere far away, explaining details my brain refused to comprehend. Off the highway, speeding, instant death, identification, the morgue. And his wife was the only thing I could ask coherently. Mrs. Thorne wasn't in the car. We've already contacted her. When the conversation ended, I sat in the dark, unable to move. My son, my only child, had died while we were fighting. Our last words to each other were full of anger. I could never tell him how much I loved him no matter what. I'll never be able to make it right. I don't remember getting dressed and hailing a cab. The morgue was cold and sterile. Officer Page was waiting for me, a young woman with sympathetic eyes. She escorted me to the examining room where I was to identify the body. Are you ready, sir? She asked quietly. How could anyone be ready for something like this? But I nodded. When the sheet was removed, I could barely stay on my feet. It was Orson, but at the same time it wasn't. His face seemed peaceful, almost relaxed, unlike the last few months when it was always expressing tension or irritation. There was a small abrasion on his forehead, the only visible mark of the accident. My boy looked like he was just sleeping. I reached out and touched his cheek. It was cold, wrongly cold. That's my son, I said, and the words echoed off the sterile walls. The next few days I moved as if in a fog. I had to organize the funeral, fill out paperwork, contact people. I did everything mechanically, feeling nothing but numbness. Carmichael came as soon as he found out, and he practically stayed with me, helping me with all the formalities. I didn't see Irma until the day after the accident, when I went to the house where she and Orson lived. She opened the door in a black dress, with flawless makeup, hiding the traces of tears. "Barnaby," she said with a nod. "Come in." In the living room sat a man in a suit. I recognized the lawyer who had represented Orson in the lawsuit against me. He stood up as I entered and held out his hand. "Mr. Thorne, my condolences." I shook his hand automatically, but inside everything was boiling. What was this man doing here so soon after a tragedy? "I thought we were going to discuss the funeral," I said, looking at Irma. "Sure," she pointed to a chair. "Have a seat. Mr. Brooks is here to help with some of the legal formalities." Legal formalities? I couldn't believe my ears. My son died less than 24 hours ago. Irma pressed her lips together. "Life goes on, Barnaby, and there are issues to be dealt with." I looked at the woman and didn't recognize her. Where was the grief? Where is the pain of loss? Her husband, my son, had died, and she was already discussing formalities with a lawyer. "What kind of questions?" I asked, feeling the anger building. Mr. Brooks coughed. "Mr. Thorne, as you know, your son's death changes the business and inheritance situation significantly. Mrs. Thorne, as the legal spouse, is the heir to all of the deceased's assets, including his share of the law firm." I shifted my gaze from him to Irma and back again. They were discussing the inheritance while Orson's body was still warm. "We're here to talk about my son's funeral," I said firmly. "Everything else can wait." "Of course," Irma mimed a sad smile. "I've already begun preparations. The ceremony will be at Holy Trinity Church, then the reception here at the house." "Orson wasn't religious," I remarked. "Many of our friends and co-workers go to this church. It would be appropriate." "Our friends," I repeated. "What about his childhood friends, school buddies, his old chess coach?" Irma waved it away. "All of that's in the past. Orson has had a new life, new surroundings for the last few years." I didn't argue. It was obvious that any suggestions I made would be rejected. Orson was my son, but she was his wife, and the law provided for her rights to make funeral arrangements. "When is the ceremony?" I asked, feeling like a stranger. "In 3 days, 11 in the morning." I nodded and stood up. "Let me know if my help is needed." "You'll have to make a speech," Irma said, as if giving instructions to a subordinate. "Something brief and appropriate." I didn't answer, just turned around and walked out. In the car, I allowed myself to cry for the first time since learning of my son's death. Not just for his loss, but for the fact that even in death, they were trying to keep us apart. Back home, I called Carmichael and told him about the meeting. He listened and sighed heavily. "She doesn't waste any time," he said. "Barney, remember when we talked about possible scenarios? This is the worst of them. She'll gain control of everything Orson owned, including his stake in the firm. Unless..." I didn't finish the sentence, but Carmichael understood. "Yeah, unless we have a trump card up our sleeve. I'll contact Samuel." It rained the day of the funeral, a fine, drizzling rain, as if the sky itself was mourning my son. The church was full of people, many of whom I didn't know. Irma's co-workers, business associates, those she called their circle. Several of my old friends came to support me, including Carmichael and Samuel Frost. Irma sat in the front row, in an elegant black suit, with a veil hiding her face. Next to her was the inevitable Mr. Brooks and a few other people in expensive suits I didn't know. The service was formal and cold. The priest, who had never met Orson, spoke general phrases about a good man and untimely loss. When it came time for the speakers, Irma rose first. "My husband was an outstanding lawyer and loving spouse," she began, her voice sounding firm. "The last years of his life were filled with meaning and purpose. Together we built a future we will never see now." She talked for another 5 minutes, about his professional accomplishments, about their plans, about how she would keep his memory alive. Not a word about his childhood, his formative years, who he was before he met her. When my turn came, I stepped up to the pulpit, looked out at the sea of unfamiliar faces, and decided to speak not for them, but for myself and for the son I had lost. "Orson was born on a rainy day like today," I began. "When the midwife placed him in my arms, he looked at me like he already understood everything. From that moment on, I knew he was special. I talked about the boy who beat me at chess at age 5, the teenager who helped neighborhood kids with their lessons, the young man who dreamed of changing the world through justice. I was talking about the son I knew and loved, not the image Irma had created. We've grown distant in recent years," I didn't bother hiding the truth. "And that is my greatest regret. But the love of a father for his son does not die because of disagreements. I have loved you from day one, Orson, and I will love you until my last breath." When I finished, there was silence in the church. I saw several older people who had known Orson since childhood wiping away tears. Irma stared straight ahead without moving. After the ceremony, there was a reception at her and Orson's home. I stood in the corner of the living room, accepting condolences from people, most of whom I was seeing for the first time. Carmichael stayed close to me, occasionally squeezing my shoulder for support. About an hour into the reception, I noticed Irma and Mr. Brooks standing in front of the fireplace. She tapped her glass with her spoon, attracting attention. The room gradually quieted down. "Thank you all for coming tonight to honor my dear husband," she began. "Orson was an exceptional man, and his loss is irreparable for all of us." She paused, taking a deep breath. "It's times like this that we think about the future, about the legacy the departed leave behind. Orson was dedicated to his work, the law practice he'd developed over the last few years." I tensed, anticipating where she was going with this. "As his legal spouse, I will inherit his share of the family business," Irma continued, looking directly at me. "And I can assure everyone here, especially the firm's clients, that I will manage that legacy with the same dedication as my husband." Mr. Brooks stepped forward, holding up a folder of documents. "As Mrs. Thorne's legal representative, I confirm that under the law, in the absence of a will, the wife is the first heir to all of the deceased's estate, including business interests, personal property, and financial assets." The guests began to whisper. Announcing an inheritance at a funeral was inappropriate, to say the least. But Irma obviously wanted to set the record straight immediately. "I know this news may come as a surprise to some," she looked at me again, "but I want to assure you that it's perfectly legal and in line with what Orson would have wanted." I felt Carmichael nudge me lightly with his elbow. "Now," he whispered. I rose, walking leisurely to the fireplace where Irma and her lawyer stood. The guests parted before me like water. When I stood next to Irma, she tensed, but maintained a flawless smile. "I'd like to set the record straight," I said calmly. "You are correct, Mr. Brooks, in that the law states that in the absence of a will, the inheritance goes to the spouse." Irma visibly relaxed, her smile growing wider. "However," I continued, looking her straight in the eye, "there is a will." The smile froze on her face. "What do you mean?" I pulled an envelope from the inside pocket of my jacket. "A month ago, Orson met with his old friend and colleague of mine, Samuel Frost. They drafted and formalized a will." Irma's face contorted with shock and disbelief. "That's impossible. He would have told me." "Apparently not," I replied, holding out the envelope to Mr. Brooks, who looked equally stunned. "There's a copy here. The original has already been filed with the probate court." Brooks opened the envelope, looked over the document, then raised his eyes to me. "This looks authentic." "What's in it?" Irma snatched the papers out of his hands, looking through them quickly. Her face paled with each line. I turned to the guests, many of whom looked embarrassed and uncomfortable witnessing family drama at a funeral. "My son, realizing that his marriage may not be as strong as he would have liked, has decided to protect the family legacy," I said. "According to his last will, the controlling interest in the firm reverts to me, subject to the establishment of an educational foundation in the name of his mother, Beatrice Thorne." I turned to Irma, who was still feverishly rereading the document. "You'll get something too, of course. Orson has always been a generous man." "It's a forgery," she squeezed out. "Orson would never do that." Samuel Frost stepped forward from the crowd of guests. "I personally testified at the signing of this will. Orson was of sound mind and sound judgment. The document is completely legitimate." "Lies!" Irma was almost shouting now. "You planned the whole thing, plotted against me." The guests began to quietly disperse, realizing that they had witnessed something very personal. Soon it was just me, Irma, Mr. Brooks, Carmichael, and Samuel left in the room. "We're going to contest that will," Brooks said, gathering his thoughts. "On what grounds, Mr. Thorne, does your son suddenly decide to change the order of inheritance without consulting his wife?" "Probably on the same grounds on which you are here now, declaring your inheritance rights at his funeral," I replied. "Orson has begun to see the true motives of some people." Irma tossed the papers to the floor. "You're going to regret this, Barnaby. I won't let you steal what is rightfully mine." "By what right, Irma?" I asked quietly. "By the right of the woman who loved my son, or by the right of one who saw in him only a path to riches?" She didn't answer, only grabbed her purse and ran out of the room. Mr. Brooks nodded awkwardly to us and followed her. When it was just the three of us, Carmichael put his hand on my shoulder. You okay, Barney? I nodded, even though everything was turning over inside. We'd just buried my son, and I was already fighting for his inheritance with the woman he'd chosen as his life partner against all odds. It was necessary, Samuel said. Orson wanted his legacy to serve a good cause, not enrich Irma. I know, I replied, but it doesn't make it any easier. We walked out of the house, which now seemed like an empty shell where my son had once lived. The rain was still drizzling, but I didn't care. I walked to the car, feeling the weight of the document in my inside pocket, Orson's last will and testament, which was now my shield and sword in the battle with Irma. I knew this was only the beginning. She wouldn't accept defeat so easily. There was a long court battle ahead, public and painful. But I was ready, for my son's memory and for the justice he had always wanted to serve. The lawsuit from Irma came a week after the funeral. I had expected it, but I still felt a stab of pain reading the lines of the legal document. Barnaby Thorne, using his influence and manipulating the emotional state of the deceased Orson Thorne, coerced him into signing an invalid will. Each word seemed like a poisoned arrow. Carmichael looked over the documents and sighed heavily. She wastes no time. Claims you took advantage of the fight between her and Orson to turn him against her. I sat in my office looking at my son's picture on my desk. What fight? She claimed they had the perfect marriage. According to her version, they had a fight the day before the will was drawn up, and Orson left for you in upset feelings. You supposedly seized the moment. I shook my head. Orson hadn't been at my place that day. From what I remembered, he was working late on a complicated case. At least that's what his secretary had said when I'd called the office. That's a lie, Carmichael. You know yourself that Orson came to Samuel voluntarily after he discovered Irma was secretly transferring money out of their joint accounts. Carmichael nodded. I know, but the court needs evidence, not our words. Thus began preparations for a trial that promised to be grueling. Irma had hired one of the best law firms in the state, specializing in inheritance disputes. I relied on Samuel Frost and a team of experienced attorneys from Orson's and my firm. The first hearing was held a month after the lawsuit was filed. I arrived at the courthouse early to prepare myself mentally. Samuel met me at the entrance. Ready for a fight? He asked, shaking my hand. As ready as one can be for a war with the woman your son chose, I replied. When we entered the courtroom, Irma was already there, wearing a strict black suit, her hair neatly gathered. She looked like the perfect image of a grieving widow. Sitting next to her was her attorney, Richard Harris, known for his aggressive tactics in court. Judge Eleanor Price, an elderly woman with a discerning eye, began the hearing at precisely 9 o'clock. After formal introductions, Harris took the floor. Your Honor, the case before us today concerns not only the legal validity of a document, but also the moral side of human relationships, he began pathosally. My client, Mrs. Irma Thorne, lost her beloved husband in the prime of her life. Instead of support and comfort, she was faced with an attempt to disinherit her legally through a document of dubious origin. He stepped closer to the judge. We will prove that the so-called will was drafted under pressure from the father-in-law at a time of emotional vulnerability for the deceased, and that it contradicts all of Orson Thorne's previously expressed wishes. Samuel was more restrained in his opening statement. Your Honor, Orson Thorne's will was made in full compliance with the law, in the presence of 2 witnesses, a notary public and myself as his attorney. Mr. Thorne was of sound mind and clear memory, acting voluntarily and knowingly. We will present irrefutable evidence of this. After the opening statements, the examination of witnesses began. First, Harris called Orson's law firm colleague, Nash Holt. Mr. Holt, how would you describe the relationship between Orson and his father in the final months before the tragedy? Nash looked uncomfortable, glancing back and forth at me and Irma. They were tense. Orson rarely mentioned his father, and when he did, it was usually in the context of a disagreement over running the firm. What about Orson's relationship with his wife? As far as I could tell, they were close. Irma would often come to the office. They'd have lunch together. Did you ever notice any indication that Orson was planning to change the inheritance arrangement to bypass his wife? Never. On the contrary, he often spoke of joint plans for the future of the firm. When it was Samuel's turn to ask questions, he approached the matter methodically. Mr. Holt, how long had you known Orson? About 4 years, since I joined the firm. And before that? In college, high school? No, we didn't know each other before that. So you haven't known Orson since childhood? Haven't witnessed him growing up, forming his values? No, of course not. Are you aware of any instances where Irma interfered with the firm's workings despite her lack of legal training? Holt squirmed in his seat. Well, she often gave her opinion on which cases were worth taking. And her opinion was usually that the more lucrative cases should be taken, rather than those that were in keeping with the firm's traditions, correct? Objection, Harris jumped in. Leading question. I'll restate it, nodded Samuel. Mr. Holt, have you noticed any changes in the types of cases Orson has taken since you married? Holt nodded. Yes, he started working more with corporate clients. Thank you. No further questions. The next witness was Orson's secretary, Veronica Smith, called by our side. Ms. Smith, please tell us about the day the will was drawn up. Was Orson in the office? No, he said he had an important meeting and left after lunch. Did he say he was going to meet with his father? No, he didn't elaborate. Just said it was a private matter. And did Irma call that day? Veronica nodded. Yes, several times. She seemed annoyed that she couldn't find Orson. Thank you. Now tell me, did you notice any changes in Orson's behavior in the last few months before she died? Yes. Veronica looked genuinely concerned. He became more withdrawn, tense. Sometimes I'd hear him arguing with someone on the phone, though he'd always been very reserved before. Did you ever hear those conversations? Partly. Once I overheard him say by accident, "It's the firm's money, not our personal money. You can't just take it." Objection, Harris jumped in again. Hearsay testimony. Sustained, the judge nodded. The jury disregarded the last statement, but the deed was done. Doubt was sown. After days of questioning witnesses, the key moment of the trial came. Samuel called Detective Ray Murphy, the private investigator I'd hired after the conflict with my son began. Mr. Murphy, please tell me the results of your investigation regarding Irma Thorne, née Sloan. The detective pulled out a file folder. I've been looking into Mrs. Thorne's background for the past 10 years. She was married twice before meeting Orson Thorne, both times to wealthy men considerably older than her. A whisper ran through the courtroom. Irma sat still, but her eyes narrowed. Her first husband, Hugh Gibson, was the owner of a chain of restaurants. The marriage lasted 18 months and ended in divorce with a large settlement for Mrs. Thorne, then still a Gibson. Her second marriage to investor Peter Rice lasted a little over 2 years and also ended in a favorable divorce for her. Objection! Harris was furious. That's irrelevant. On the contrary, Your Honor, Samuel objected calmly. Mrs. Thorne's character and intentions are directly relevant to the question of whether someone manipulated Orson into making the will. Continue, Mr. Murphy, the judge allowed after a pause. After her second divorce, Mrs. Thorne, then Rice, was seen in the company of several wealthy men before she met Orson Thorne. Interestingly, all of her romantic interests possessed considerable wealth. That's not a crime yet, Harris snorted. No, the detective agreed. But I've also uncovered some interesting financial transactions. After her marriage to Orson Thorne, Mrs. Thorne opened several accounts in the Cayman Islands where funds were periodically transferred from the couple's joint accounts. This was news even to me. I looked at Irma. She had gone pale but maintained her outward calm. I have the account statements, the detective continued, handing the documents to the judge. In the last year before Mr. Thorne's death, about $800,000 was transferred into these accounts. And what's criminal about that? Harris asked during cross-examination. Many couples share finances, usually with the knowledge of both parties, Murphy parried. Judging from Mr. Thorne's email correspondence with his banker, which I was able to obtain, he was unaware of these accounts and was alarmed by the disappearance of the money. It was a turning point in the trial. Irma, who had hitherto held her confidence, began to show signs of nervousness. She conferred frequently with her lawyer, sometimes quite stormily. The next day, Samuel presented another unexpected piece of evidence, an audio recording. Your Honor, we have a recording of a conversation between Irma Thorne and her friend Vivian Reed, made a month before Orson's death. This recording was legally obtained because it took place in a public place, the Azure Cafe, where Mr. Murphy conducted surveillance. After a brief deliberation, the judge allowed the tape to be played. Irma's voice came through clearly. He's getting suspicious. Asked about the accounts yesterday. I said it was for investments, but he wanted to see the documents. And what did you do? A voice, presumably belonging to Vivian. Told him my financial advisor had them. But that won't last long. Need to speed things up with the firm. Once the old man steps aside, we'll have control of everything. And if he balks? Irma's laugh sounded cold. Then we'll have to use Plan B, At his age, it wouldn't surprise anyone with a sudden decline in health or memory problems. There was silence in the courtroom. Irma looked as if she'd been punched. Harris was desperately leafing through his notes, obviously trying to find a way to discredit the record. Your Honor, we can't guarantee that this is actually my client's voice, or that the recording hasn't been edited, he finally blurted out. We have an expert opinion on the authenticity of the recording, Samuel replied calmly, handing over another document. The judge studied it and nodded. I'm admitting the recording into evidence. Irma leaned over to her attorney, and they began to whisper heatedly. It was obvious that our side had gained a significant advantage. The next witness for the defense was myself. Samuel gently guided me through the testimony, allowing me to talk about my relationship with my son, how it had changed since his marriage to Irma, and Orson's gradual estrangement from family and friends. Mr. Thorne, when was the last time you saw your son before he died? 2 weeks before the accident, I answered, trying to speak evenly. He came to my house late at night, was very upset, said he'd discovered something disturbing about his and Irma's finances. What was it? He found documents about accounts in the Cayman Islands and large transfers there. When he asked Irma, she got angry and accused him of mistrusting her. They had a big fight. What happened then? Orson asked if I knew a good family law attorney. I recommended Samuel Frost, whom we'd known for many years. So the initiative to meet with Mr. Frost came from your son, not you? Absolutely. I wasn't even present when they first met. Harris, on cross-examination, tried to undermine my testimony by pointing out my obvious interest in the outcome of the case, but I remained calm and consistent. Mr. Thorne, don't you find it convenient that your son's will disinherits his wife of most of her inheritance and transfers control of the firm to you? Convenient, no. Fair, yes, I answered bluntly. Orson wanted to protect my life's work from a man he didn't trust, and the foundation in his mother's name was his own idea. And you expect us to believe that you didn't put any pressure on your emotionally vulnerable son during a time of family conflict? I expect you to consider all the evidence, including the ones that show Irma's true intentions. The trial lasted 2 weeks. Each day I saw Irma's confidence melt away, especially after we presented another witness, her former friend Liz Turner, who spoke of Irma's strategy of finding rich men and capitalizing on relationships with them. She always said marriage was a business deal, Liz testified. She was looking for a certain type of man, successful, wealthy, preferably without children who could claim an inheritance. When was the last time you had contact with Mrs. Thorne? Samuel asked. About a year before she met Orson. We quarreled over my disapproval of her methods. Irma, listening to this testimony, looked as if she were ready to throw herself at the witness. Harris tried to undermine Liz's credibility by insinuating a personal grudge, but her testimony was too specific to be completely dismissed. On the last day of the hearing, before the jury retired for deliberations, Harris made one last attempt to save the day by playing on emotion. We see here a classic case of family conflict, he said, addressing the jury. The father-in-law, who disapproved of his son's choice, decided to use the tragedy to regain control of the family business. A young widow who lost her beloved husband now faces an attempt to strip her of her rightful inheritance through questionable manipulation. Samuel was more restrained in his closing argument and relied on the facts. Members of the jury, you have heard evidence that Irma Thorne systematically selected wealthy men, manipulated them for financial gain, and secretly transferred large sums of money into hidden accounts. You've heard how she planned to get rid of her father-in-law, perhaps even by harming his health. Orson Thorne discovered his wife's betrayal and decided to protect the family legacy through a legal will. This is not a conflict between father-in-law and daughter-in-law. This is a story about defending the justice to which Orson Thorne has dedicated his life. The jury retired to deliberate, and all we had to do was wait. I sat in the hallway of the courthouse looking at the portraits of past judges. I wondered what Orson would say when he saw all this. Would he be proud of me for defending his last will and testament, or would he be upset at the public disclosure of family problems? Irma sat at the far end of the hallway, not looking in my direction. Despite all the evidence of her self-interest, I couldn't help but feel some pity. She had lost, and she knew it. On the third day of sessions, the court was packed. News of the scandalous case had spread throughout University City, attracting the attention of not only lawyers, but also ordinary citizens. I noticed several reporters from local newspapers sitting quietly in the back rows. Irma looked as impeccable as ever. Elegant suit, understated makeup, not a single hair out of place. Only tense shoulders and too straight back gave away her inner state. Richard Harris was still beside her, ready to fend off any attack from our side. Samuel reported that we had a strong witness today and advised us to remain calm no matter what happened. The main thing is not to get emotional, he admonished me before the session began. Judge Eleanor Price entered the room at 9 o'clock sharp. She was known for her punctuality and impartiality. After the formalities, Samuel took the stand. Your Honor, the defense calls Thomas Kingsley. A whisper swept through the room, and I saw Irma flinch and whisper something quickly in her attorney's ear. Thomas had been an old friend of Orson's since high school, but they hadn't spoken much in recent years. I hadn't seen him myself since my son's wedding day. Thomas walked in, a tall, lean man with intelligent eyes behind thin-rimmed glasses. He nodded to me before taking the witness stand. After taking the oath, Samuel began his questioning. Mr. Kingsley, how long have you known Orson Thorne? Since I was 8 years old. We met in 3rd grade and remained friends until his death. Thomas's voice trembled slightly at the last words. How close was your relationship? Very close. We went to high school together, then college. I was best man at his wedding. We were like brothers. And in recent years? Thomas was silent for a moment, then answered slowly. Our communication became less frequent after he got married. We still called each other and sometimes saw each other, but not as often as we used to. Can you tell the court why that happened? Thomas adjusted his glasses, obviously choosing his words. After the wedding, Orson started to change. Unnoticeable at first, canceled a few of our traditional meetings, said he was busy. Then he began to avoid talking about his family, about his work. And after about a year, he stopped answering his cell phone. Have you tried to find out the reason? Of course. I even drove over to their house unannounced. Irma was not very hospitable. He cast a quick glance in her direction. Said Orson was very busy with new clients and projects, that he had a different life now. Did you talk to him then? Not for long. He looked embarrassed, almost guilty. Said he'd call back next week, but he didn't. Samuel nodded. Mr. Kingsley, when was the last time you saw Orson before he died? A month before the accident. He called me out of the blue in the middle of the night asking to meet. We met at the Blue Oyster Bar, an old place we went to as students. What did you talk about? Orson was upset. Said he'd discovered something troubling about his finances. Large sums were disappearing, and when he asked Irma, she reacted aggressively, accusing him of mistrust. I watched Irma's face. She maintained a stony expression, but the fingers clutching the pen turned white with tension. What else did he tell you? Samuel continued. He said he felt trapped, that Irma had gradually isolated him from everyone he cared about, his friends, his father, that she was controlling his every move. He even said, Thomas hesitated. Yes, Mr. Kingsley? He said that sometimes he feels like she's watching him, that there were cameras installed in their house that he didn't know about, that his phone was constantly being checked. Objection! Harris jumped in. That's just rumor and speculation. The witness is relaying the words of the deceased, Your Honor, Samuel objected. The judge thought for a moment. The objection is overruled. Proceed. Mr. Kingsley, did Orson say anything to you about plans to change the will? Yes. He said he wanted to protect the family legacy, that he didn't trust Irma, especially after the financial shenanigans discovered. He mentioned meeting with an attorney to discuss options. Was that his initiative? Absolutely. He was very determined. One last question, Mr. Kingsley. Did Orson mention plans for a divorce? Thomas looked directly at Irma. Yes. He said he was gathering evidence of financial irregularities to use in the divorce. He was afraid she would try to take everything away from him, and he wanted to prepare. There was silence in the courtroom. It was the first time I'd ever heard my son seriously consider divorce. Why didn't he come to me? Why didn't he confide in me? Was Irma's influence really that strong? Harris began the cross-examination aggressively. Mr. Kingsley, you claim to have been a close friend of Orson's, yet you admit that you've had little contact in recent years. So how can you judge his family life? Thomas didn't flinch. I knew Orson for most of his life. Even if we didn't see each other every day, I understood him better than most people. Maybe the reason you were estranged was because your interests diverged. That Orson grew up and you stayed in the past? Perhaps, but that doesn't explain why he became estranged from all his old friends and his father at the same time. Harris changed tactics. You don't like Mrs. Thorne, do you? I have no particular feelings for her. I just see the results of her influence on my friend. So you are biased and interested in the outcome of this case? I have an interest in seeing Orson's will carried out, and in making sure the truth is known. After Thomas left, Samuel announced, Your Honor, the defense has one more piece of evidence. We would like to introduce an audio recording of a conversation between Irma Thorne and financial advisor Jeremy Briggs. Harris immediately jumped in. Your Honor, we have not been notified of this evidence. I demand time to review it. This recording was recently discovered in Orson Thorne's cell phone, which was returned to the family by the police after the accident investigation, Samuel explained calmly. We immediately reported it as soon as we verified its authenticity. After a brief deliberation, the judge allowed the tape to be played. Orson had apparently secretly recorded a conversation between Irma and her financial advisor, taking place in their home while he was supposedly at work. The transfer should be discreet, Irma's voice sounded businesslike, without the usual softness she displayed in public. Orson is starting to ask too many questions. We could frame it as a real estate investment, a male voice replied. But the amounts are too large to be overlooked altogether. He doesn't understand finance, that's my field. The main thing is to complete the transfer before the matter with the firm is resolved. And if it doesn't work out in your favor? Irma's laugh sounded cold. It will. I have my own methods of persuasion. Besides, we've already paved the way for his father to be declared incompetent. Orson will have control over everything. And what about your personal plans? A pause. All in good time, Jeremy. Business first, then pleasure. The recording ended. Irma sat motionless, staring in front of her. Harris was frantically leafing through papers, obviously trying to find a way to discredit the recording. Your Honor, he began, we cannot authenticate this conversation or the context in which it took place. We have expert testimony that the recording has not been edited, Samuel interrupted him, handing over the documents. And the context is pretty clear from the content itself. The judge studied the documents and nodded. The recording is admitted into evidence. After a short recess, Samuel called another witness, Irma's former driver, Marcus Reed. Mr. Reed, how long did you work for the Thorne family? About 2 years with a short break. I was fired a month before Mr. Thorne died. Why were you fired? Marcus looked uncomfortable. Mrs. Thorne said I was no longer required, but I think the real reason is that I saw and heard too much. What exactly have you seen and heard? I often took Mrs. Thorne to meetings that Mr. Thorne didn't know about, with different men, to restaurants, hotels. One day I happened to overhear a conversation on the phone. She was telling someone that the plan was on schedule and that she would soon be free of it all. Did you tell Orson Thorne about this? Yes, eventually. I hesitated for a long time, but decided he should know. The next day I was fired. What did Mr. Thorne say when you told him? He looked not surprised. Rather, it confirmed what he already suspected. He thanked me and said he would take action. After Marcus Reed's testimony, it was clear that the case was taking a definite turn. Irma's face grew increasingly tense, and Harris looked as if he was looking for ways to retreat. The next day, the defense presented the last piece of important evidence, a letter Orson had written to his friend Thomas a week before his death. This letter was found in Thomas Kingsley's belongings after his testimony, Samuel explained. It was never sent, but it contains important clues to Orson Thorne's state of mind. The letter, written in Orson's hand, read, Tom, if you are reading this, it means something has gone wrong. I have discovered that Irma has been systematically transferring money into secret accounts in preparation for something. She was seeing other men, and I think she was planning to divorce me once she got control of the firm. I changed my will to protect my father's legacy. I'm afraid she suspects something. She's become even more controlling. My laptop went missing yesterday, and with it some of the evidence. If anything happens to me, please help my father protect the firm. She mustn't ruin everything. When the letter was read aloud, there was absolute silence in the courtroom. I looked at Irma. Her facade had finally cracked. She looked cornered, frightened. Harris had tried to challenge the authenticity of the letter, but an expert graphologist had confirmed that the handwriting was Orson's. In addition, the letter mentioned details that only close friends knew. A nickname they used in college, a joke from their past. Then it was time for Irma's own testimony. She entered the witness stand with her head held high, but her confidence seemed contrived. Mrs. Thorne, Samuel began, do you claim that your marriage to Orson has been a happy and harmonious one? Yes, absolutely, her voice sounded firm. Then how do you explain all the evidence of isolation, control, financial fraud? It's all lies orchestrated by my father-in-law who never accepted me. She cast a glance in my direction. He manipulated Orson, turned him against me. And the notes? The letter? The testimony of several witnesses? The notes can be taken out of context. The letter could have been written under duress, and the witnesses are either loyal to Mr. Thorne or have personal scores to settle with me. Samuel slowly stepped closer. Mrs. Thorne, please tell me, is it true that you were married twice to wealthy men before you met Orson, and both marriages ended in favorable divorces? She paused. Yes, but that's irrelevant. Is it true that after you met Orson, you made a study of his financial situation and inheritance prospects? That's absurd. I fell in love with him when we met at a charity event. Interesting that you mention a charity event. Samuel picked up a document from the table. We have testimony from the organizer of that event that you specifically asked to be introduced to Orson after learning who he was. Irma turned pale. I just heard of him as a good lawyer. Mrs. Thorne, do you admit that you opened accounts in the Cayman Islands without your husband's knowledge? It was an investment for our future. Investments he didn't know about, and which you tried to hide when he started asking questions. Irma was silent, clearly realizing that her every word could be used against her. No further questions, Your Honor, Samuel said, walking back to the table. Harris tried to salvage the situation by asking Irma questions that would allow her to present her version of events, but it was too late. The jury had seen too much evidence against her. On the final day of the trial, both sides presented their closing arguments. Harris appealed to emotion, painting an image of a young widow victimized by a family conspiracy. Samuel relied on facts and logic, methodically building a picture of manipulation and deception on Irma's part. Members of the jury, he said, the story before you is not just a story of family conflict. It is a story of betrayal of trust, of self-serving motives disguised as love. Orson Thorne learned the truth about his wife and took action to protect his legacy. His last will must be honored. When the jury retired for deliberations, there was a tense silence in the courtroom. I sat staring straight ahead, feeling a strange emptiness. Even if we won, it wouldn't bring my son back. Wouldn't undo what had happened between us. Irma sat across the aisle, surrounded by her lawyers. She no longer looked confident, more like she was cornered. From time to time, she cast hateful glances in my direction. I felt neither hatred nor schadenfreude toward her, just fatigue and sadness at the way things had turned out. 3 hours later, the jury returned. It was impossible to read anything on their faces. As the foreman rose to announce the verdict, I closed my eyes, mentally addressing my son. I hope I did what you wanted me to do, Orson. We, the jury, find that the will of Orson Thorne, dated March 23rd, is a legal and valid document, made under full capacity and without duress. The foreman's voice sounded clear and confident. Silence hung in the courtroom, broken only by muffled whispers from the public gallery. I sat still, feeling a wave of relief wash over me. Samuel squeezed my shoulder lightly, a discreet but understandable gesture of support. Judge Price tapped her gavel. The court accepts the jury's verdict. Orson Thorne's will is recognized as valid and enforceable in its entirety. This session is adjourned. I shifted my gaze to Irma. She sat as still as a statue, her fingers clenched in a lock, white with tension. Her lawyer leaned toward her, saying something quickly, but she didn't seem to hear. When she finally raised her eyes and met my gaze, I saw in them not remorse, not shame, but cold, calculating hatred. Reporters swarmed toward us as soon as we left the courtroom. Camera flashes, tape recorders, shouted questions, all blended into a cacophony. Samuel answered professionally for both of us as we made our way to the exit. Mr. Thorne is satisfied with the court's decision. Justice has been served. No, we will make no comment on Mrs. Thorne's identity. In the car, I was finally able to exhale. 3 months of court hearings, exhausting interrogations, publicly turning family secrets inside out. It was over. Orson's will be honored, his last will and testament honored. But I felt no joy, only fatigue and a strange emptiness. What now? I asked Samuel as we pulled away from the courthouse. Technically, Irma could appeal, he replied thoughtfully. But after this much evidence, her chances are minimal. She'll only get what Orson explicitly stated in his will, $200,000, and the collection of paintings he bought well after the wedding. And everything else? According to the will, the controlling interest in the firm reverts to you, subject to the creation of the Beatrice Educational Foundation. The rest of Orson's assets will be divided between the foundation and several charitable organizations he supported. I nodded. Orson had thought of everything. Even in his final days, when his marriage was falling apart, he'd remained responsible, thinking about the future, about legacy. Well, it's time to get back to work, I said, looking out the window at the city floating by, and create the foundation he wanted. Over the next few weeks, I immersed myself in work. The firm demanded attention. Many clients were concerned about the litigation and press coverage. Reputation had to be restored. Trust had to be regained. At the same time, I was working on the paperwork for the Beatrice Thorne Educational Foundation. Irma disappeared from town right after the trial. Rumor has it that she moved to another state, taking the money and property she was owed in her will. I didn't follow her. I had enough to worry about. One morning, about a month after the trial ended, I got a call from Thomas Kingsley. "Barnaby, have you heard the news?" There was excitement in his voice. "What news?" "About Irma. She got married." I froze, clutching the receiver. "Already? It's only been 4 months since Orson died." "Yeah, and you know who? To Jeremy Briggs, the same financial advisor they used to transfer money to offshore accounts with." "Are you sure?" "Absolutely. One of my friends saw them together in the Bahamas. They're not even hiding." After that call, I sat in my office for a long time looking at Orson's picture. So Irma hadn't wasted any time. Barely having received her inheritance, she'd hooked up with her accomplice, perhaps a lover, and moved on. I wonder who her real target was when she married my son. His money? The firm? Or was it all part of some larger scheme we'd ruined? Either way, it didn't matter now. I had to move forward with my son's last will and testament. The Beatrice Thorne Foundation was officially registered 2 months after the trial ended. Its charter was to provide scholarships to talented Black law students, helping them get a quality education and start their careers. Special emphasis was placed on those who planned to work in the public interest field, defending the rights of vulnerable populations. On the day the foundation opened, I visited my son's grave. The cemetery was quiet, with only the wind rustling in the leaves of the trees. Orson's grave was next to his mother's, as it should be. I placed flowers on both slabs and sat down on the bench across from it. "We did it, son," I said quietly, looking at the engraved name. "The fund is open. The first scholarships will be awarded as early as next semester." The wind moved the grass on the grave as if in response. I imagined Orson and Beatrice sitting somewhere together, watching me, watching what I was doing with their legacy. My only regret is that we lost so much time because of our differences. If I had been more attentive, maybe I would have noticed earlier what was going on. Maybe we could have prevented— I didn't finish the sentence. There's no point in saying "if only" now. You can't get the past back. One can only move forward, trying to correct what can still be corrected. The Beatrice Thorne Foundation's first intake of fellows took place in the fall. I personally participated in the selection of candidates, reading their essays, studying recommendations. In the end, we chose 5 young people with exceptional abilities and a sincere desire to change the world for the better. The scholarship award ceremony was held in the auditorium of the law school of the local university. I sat on the stage, watching the students come out one by one to receive their certificates. Their faces glowed with pride and determination. "Layla Jones," the announcer announced, and a tall girl with neat pigtails and intelligent eyes took the stage. I shook her hand, handing her a certificate. "Congratulations, Ms. Jones." "Thank you, Mr. Thorne," she smiled. "I've been reading about your son. He was an outstanding lawyer." "Yes, he was." I felt something clench in my chest. "He would have been proud of you, all of you." After the ceremony, I invited the fellows to a small reception at the offices of Thorne and Associates. I'd changed the name, deciding it would be the best way to move forward. The young people were curious about the photos on the walls, asking questions about the famous cases we'd handled. Layla stopped in front of a picture of Orson. "He was so young," she said quietly. 34, I nodded. "Too young to leave." "But his legacy lives on." She circled her hand around the room where the fellows were gathered. "In us." In that moment, I felt the heaviness that had been pressing on my heart all these months recede a little. Yes, Orson couldn't be brought back. But his cause, his values, his belief in justice, all of that continued to live on in these young people, in the foundation that bears his mother's name, in the firm we built together. In the following years, the Beatrice Thorne Foundation became known throughout the country. We expanded the program, increased the number of scholarships, and opened new opportunities for talented students. I personally mentored many scholarship recipients, helping them build careers, overcome challenges, and stay true to their principles. I rarely heard from Irma. Her marriage to Briggs was rumored to have lasted less than a year. Then she married again, this time to the owner of a West Coast hotel chain. History repeated itself. One day, almost 3 years after the trial ended, I happened to meet her at the University City Airport. I was returning from a conference. She had apparently flown in to visit some old acquaintances. We ran into each other in the baggage claim area. Irma looked almost the same as before. Impeccable makeup, expensive clothes, confident posture. But something in her eyes had changed. They seemed empty, tired. She noticed me first and froze for a moment, then slowly approached. "Barnaby," she nodded. "Irma," I answered in the same way. The silence dragged on. "What do you say to a man who tried to take everything from you? Who may have been indirectly responsible for your son's death?" "I heard about the foundation," she finally said. "It seems to be successful." "Yes, we've helped 23 students so far." She nodded, looking somewhere past me. "Orson would be pleased." "Yes, he would be." I looked at her carefully. "And you? Are you satisfied with your life, Irma?" Her face contorted for a moment, as if the mask had slipped, exposing something real, painful. But she quickly pulled herself together. "My life is beautiful, Barnaby. Have a nice day." She turned and walked away, clacking her high heels on the marble floor. I stared after her, thinking about the cost of greed. Irma could have had everything: a loving husband, respect, a place in society. Instead, she chased after money and power, losing what was most precious. Back home, I pulled out an old photo album. Orson as a child, smiling with a knocked-out front tooth. Orson as a teenager, serious and focused at the chessboard. Orson in his graduation robe, standing proudly between Beatrice and me. The last picture of us together was at the wedding, where I'm standing next to him, trying to smile for the camera, and an invisible wall is already growing between us. I closed the album and walked to the window. The sun was setting, coloring the city in warm, golden tones. Tomorrow I was meeting with the new candidates for the Beatrice Thorne Foundation Scholarship. There was a lot of work ahead, a lot of lives we could help. I thought of Irma, of her empty eyes, of the way she was leaving, lonely despite all the money and connections. I thought of those fellows who had already begun their journey in the profession, carrying with them the values Orson and I had tried to follow all our lives. In a sense, justice had been served, not just in the courts, but in a deeper, lifelong sense. Irma got what she deserved: emptiness and loneliness masquerading behind money and status. And Orson and Beatrice's legacy lived on, helping those in need, making a difference in the world. I felt no gloating or vengeful satisfaction, only a quiet confidence that everything had turned out right, that despite the loss and pain, life goes on, and there is still room for goodness and justice. "We did it, Orson," I said quietly, looking out at the sunset. "Your legacy lives on."